What are we talking about today? I don't even know.
Oh, you'll find out.
Oops.
You'll
No.
find
Oh, so you take the completely surprise the guests
Yes.
approach.
Very, very
I like.
personal things. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of improv.
Andrew Allan is an author who splits his time between Gainesville and Clearwater, Florida. When he's not writing novels, he's a top infomercial writer and director. He also makes wild cult movies and raises his three children. And I did want to ask you first off, which one of those last two most defies credulity? The cult movies or the three kids? Their antics, perhaps.
They're pretty dead even right there. I love them both, but they're as advertised.
Right. Yeah, I only have two. So what ages are yours? Mine are, they're four. Mine are four right now.
I have 13, 15, 18, and I have a 20-year-old stepdaughter.
Okay.
So
right.
I'm covering the gamut of the most difficult years all at once.
So, where you are now in raising kids, like, does it get easier, or do the challenges just change? That's my big question.
They change.
Yeah, because I'm just starting out, so it's just,
No, they change. I mean, it's hard the moment they slip out, and like my whole analogy for that has always been like the day your kid's born. It's like you get in a big car wreck, and then the car's tumbling over, and then like 4 weeks later, it's not tumbling as fast, and then 8 weeks later, it's like settled on its roof, but it's still spinning around. And then like 12 weeks, you can finally climb out and see what kind of damage there is, and is everybody all right? And,
yeah.
And then from there, it's just a grab bag of all kinds of stuff, from getting them to eat to getting them to do their homework to, kids with attitudes. They like to flex that new attitude that they develop, and it's like you're kind of the target practice.
Yeah, I speak from little experience yet, but I have twin boys. They're both 4 years old, and they've already found their attitude, particularly one.
I could not do twins.
I wouldn't have volunteered. I will tell you that.
I'm not gonna lie. I've had that moment where I thought to myself, and I think this was back when I had two that were both relatively young, and I thought to myself, how on earth does anyone do this with twins? Thank God we dodged that bullet. Not to make you feel bad, but I'm just complete indoor here.
Yeah, it is what it is. And again, it's not something I would have signed up for. You do it. People ask how I do it. I don't really know. I mean, it's just something you do. It's just like a daily thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, so you're not new to writing, but perhaps maybe you're more new to writing novels. So what finally gave you the kick in the ass and was hard enough to get you to begin writing books?
I won't disclose the author, and I won't disclose the book, but it was a nationally published piece of mass market fiction that I was reading. And a third of the way into it, I actually caught myself saying, I can do better than this, which I kind of felt bad about, and resolved that I needed to put not my money where my mouth is, but whatever where my mouth is, and actually write a book. And that dovetailed with some other things that had been going on with my life. I'd been writing commercials and screenplays for many years. I'd been doing online marketing type stuff for many years. And so then as I started to explore this idea of actually writing a book, I realized that this could be a culmination of so many things I've already worked with in my life. Most satisfyingly, it's just me. Like I like to collaborate with people, but I also don't like to collaborate with people. And this was a chance for me to just create something that I could control, and it didn't necessarily go into a drawer.
Yeah. Right.
It wouldn't be bad getting a check for it, like some of my other writing, but then I have to collaborate with people.
Right. So I was going to ask you about that, because one of the things that you've said that has attracted you to writing was the relative solitude as opposed to the unavoidable collaborative properties of filmmaking, for example. At the same time, independent publishing does sometimes work best in concert with others, and I was just wondering like how you've reconciled the desire for solitude with the occasional necessity of working with other authors. Is it just simply a matter that the process is more solitary?
Well, let's be honest. I have 4 kids, and there's never solitude, honestly. But to answer your question, it's it's a creative control thing. So whatever happens, I can write the story that I want to write. I love the ability to, change it if I want, put it out there when I want, how I want. I mean, of course, I deal with like a cover designer, or I'll have someone take a look for editing and things like that. But I'm still in control because an editor could make a suggestion and I can tell them to take a hike.
Right.
I don't feel it's right. So there's that. The collaboration, which I don't mind, is more in the marketing sense, where it's, like we've done with newsletter swaps or social media, things like that. Book funnel type promotions, things like that. Those are all great. I'm not necessarily an introvert, and I don't hate people. But I do want some space and control to kind of do my thing. And at least if it's terrible and it flops, you know what, I did it my way and I can live with that.
Right. No, and I think I know exactly what you're talking about. I had a book that was published by a more traditional publisher. This was years ago. But the problem was like they had control over it, and so they put a cover on it and it was just absolutely hideous. And I just looked at it and it's like, there's no way I can get out there and market this. Like I would be embarrassed to stand in an author signing line and write my name on it. I mean, that's how bad it was. It was really pathetic, and they wouldn't change it. Is the problem?
I would have written this cover sucks on it. Sincerely,
do not yet. I'm not to blame.
It would have made a nice memory for the reader. I had the same problem with a movie I put out. I directed a feature and. Just, man, they made a bad cover, and despite protests and whatnot, they pushed forward with it. So just kind of reinforced my desire to sort of be in control. But at the same time, I know I don't know it all. So when I feel like I don't know it enough, that's when I'll hand some things over.
Yeah, I think knowing that line is key. But hey, I mean, covers do matter, whether people want to admit it or not. They absolutely do. But your work with novels has been described as Florida fiction. So what characterizes something as Florida fiction other than, say, the obvious fact of being set there?
I think, well, there's different types of Florida fiction, right? Mm-hmm. So there's, and I mean, there's different types of Florida crime fiction. John D. McDonald is not the same as Carl Hyacin, who's not the same as Elmore Leonard, and so on. Mm-hmm. So the distinguishing features for my Florida fiction would be, part of it's the location in Florida, because Florida is like its own country, not just from the sensational headline standpoint, but geographically speaking. Where I live in Tampa is nothing like Miami. It's not really much like, Southwest coast, like Naples and such. And so my stories are set up in Dunellen, Florida, kind of near Gainesville, which is sort of where, in my view, the South and Florida merge the best, more so than at the state line. At the state line, it's already deep South. At Gainesville, it's, more of a blend.
Okay.
And so, that's one way it distinguishes me a little bit. I mean, people write characters who are set all over Florida. So I purposely did a little bit of that. I didn't really want to write too much at the beach because there's a ton of that. And, that was all part of the process of, well, how do I put something out there that's different and relevant?
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting to hear that about Florida. I know a lot of states have, regions within the state that are different, but Florida is such a vibrant I'm not an expert on Florida, but it just seems like such a vibrant place that it would be easy to see how you could take various aspects of it and focus on that within as a subgenre of fiction, for example. So your main character, a guy named Walt Asher, who suspiciously enough is a reclusive infomercial writer. Is it safe to say that you've written some of yourself into that character?
Yes. Yeah,
How
I mean,
much?
I'd be lying through my teeth. But I think every author does that if they're writing honestly. And, that whole thing came from, well, again, I've written, dozens of screenplays. I've written thousands of commercials. So I know how to write, but coming to books was a different thing. And I kind of put training wheels on myself, and that I stuck to some of the platitudes you hear, like write what you know and things like that. So my goal was just to write the book I wanted to read and use that, do that by kind of writing what I know. Of course, it appealed to me having an infomercial writer because he's not a cop, he's not a lawyer, he's not a vet, he's not a journalist, which there are a zillion of.
Right.
And they're great. I read plenty of those books, but I didn't want to write those books because I really don't know a lot about any of them.
Yeah, I mean, some of those tropes that we know, like write what you know, they've stuck around so long for a reason. I mean, you don't want to become a slave to those things, but on the other hand, there's a lot of truth to be taken from those as well.
That's what made me comfortable starting this book, because I felt like an outsider despite my years of writing experience, and was fully prepared for it to be terrible.
Well, it wasn't.
But it turned out to be all right.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was, the reviews have, justified my notion that I could actually do better than that terrible book I was reading.
Well, I can tell you this. I've shared your books with my readers on occasion or two, and I always get a note or two or three back saying how much they enjoyed it.
Oh, well, that's good.
So
I thought you were going to say they write back they could do better than that.
No.
Which is fine. That's my whole thing. Prove it.
Right. Let's see what you got. No, yeah. They're always complimentary. I haven't heard anything bad about them from anybody. They've really enjoyed them. So it's something so whenever you have something new coming out and are putting something together, I'm always happy to share it because I know that my audience will enjoy it because they tell me so every time.
Likewise.
There's some lesser known characteristics possibly of Walt Asher that readers either may not have picked up on or perhaps haven't been written into books yet that you know about it that might be interesting to readers.
Lesser known characteristics. Well, there's an evolution to his character. And much of that will be coming out in the third book, which I'm editing now.
Okay.
First book, he's completely caught off guard. His best friend is killed. He happens to stumble upon something that looks like it could be suspicious, does the good citizen thing and tells the authorities, and the next thing he knows, people are coming to kill him. So he's kind of pushed into this whole thing, and he has to, much like this interview, we have to improvise. He has to improvise using what he knows, and he's not an expert at weapons, and he's not an expert at fighting or things like that. He has to dabble in those things, but his weapon is words, and he can persuade. That's what he does with infomercials. And so he's able to kind of persuade his way out of some dicey situations, as well as, raw guts and fury and things like that. But so the first book really is him just, much like that car wreck I mentioned with childbirth. He was kind of going through the same thing. And then the second book is sort of, so when I wrote the first book, I didn't necessarily think there would be a sequel. I wrote the first book because I had a movie idea laying around where I thought it would just be great to have a movie where the villain is just this huge, like almost medieval style executioner walking around with a giant axe chopping people's heads off. And that's not what happens in the book necessarily, but there is an element of that. And so when I wrote the book, like I said, it brought a lot of things together. It was to maybe do something with this movie idea, give me something to control creatively, prove if I could write a book or not. All these things came together. But as the story came about, and one thing I was really happy with the first book, Killers, Bikers, and Freaks, is I shocked myself. I did not even know the ending when I wrote it. Really, really, I was
That's
kind
awesome.
of amazed. And so I finished the book, and I was like, okay, I like this book writing thing, and reception seems to be pretty good. And so, okay, obviously, I'll do another book, and I liked the character enough that I decided to write another one. And so that second book is him uncovering a bigger deal with the bad guys who were really we get a hint of in the first one.
Hmm.
And so then it becomes more, in the first book, it wasn't a choice. Second book, it is a choice.
Right.
And just like me dipping my toe into writing books, Walt's dipping his toe into actually trying to stop this secret society.
Hmm.
And, what does that do to the man as that happens? So the third book kind of deals with what he's become as a result of that. And I see this third book as sort of the last of a trilogy for this particular, story.
Hmm.
And then I have an idea to kind of change the direction with Walt after that.
Okay. So even after the end of the trilogy, Walt will still be with us.
I'm not promising it,
Okay.
honestly. And I told my newsletter readers this. I will write it to the best of my abilities. And if for whatever reason everything points to Walt needs to die, he's going to die.
Got to kill your darlings.
I think people would see through it if I didn't.
Right.
So,
So are the books, the three books that you have out right now, do those need to be read in order, or can they be read in any order whatsoever? Or the two and then the third one that you have coming out?
I think you'll get a more satisfying experience if you read them in order,
Okay.
but they don't have to be read in order. I was trying to be conscious of that as I wrote them. And then, so you have the three, and that goes for the novellas too, because you have the three books that, the three novels, the third of which I'm finishing, and then a book like Cell Shock and a book like Walt's Fault. They're sort of like interstitial stories between two of the main characters, Walt and DG. And, they kind of, chronologically, they take place between the novels, but you can read them anytime.
Okay, cool. So obviously you write books like that are set in places you know. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe this question doesn't even know, and you've chosen a character that you can identify with. So maybe this question doesn't apply. But do you do any research for your books, or you just pretty much just stick with what you know?
Well, I might research specific little things, whether it's about like a certain type of gun or, you anything that I can use to support the credibility of the story. But I'm definitely not one of those guys who will spend a long time doing a lot of research.
Yeah.
The pleasure for me comes from the writing, and I think you feel that when you read it. You may know this from your own writing, but if the goal is to try and get in that zone where you're not thinking about anything else and you're just kind of spitting it onto paper, and it'll probably stink, but you come up with stuff you never would have been able to conceive ahead of time.
Right.
At least for me, that's how it works.
Yeah. No, and it's a beautiful thing when that happens, when you're in that zone. I mean, there's really nothing better that I can think of than being in that zone in that moment and just having the words course onto the page. It's like,
Exactly.
yay!
And a great example of that for me is in this book that's coming out is, there's a scene in a plane hangar, and, you've got the tail numbers on the plane. And so I was trying to figure out what to do with that. And I did a little bit of research. And what I found out is this particular configuration of tail number is sometimes also used for ham radio.
Oh.
And so that's a great little pivot thing.
Yeah.
That's an example where research really helped me out.
Yeah. And I do hear you when you say you kind of research individual things, maybe not on a broader sense, but specific things like, weapons and whatnot. Like I had to do quite a bit of research, or relatively a lot of research on guns, because I wasn't certainly an expert on it, something like he grabbed his shooty bang and ran out the door. I mean, You can get a little more
And you're
specific
able to
than that.
completely rely on all those drunken encounters with Hemingway in One Night in Key West. I can tell. I know you didn't make that up. You didn't research it. That happened.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned not knowing the ending of the book. Now, is that kind of your writing process for each book that you've or story that you're working on, or do you ever outline something in advance?
Well, what inevitably happens is so for now, until I become a better writer, I'm sort of stuck in the 3-act structure, which I don't have a problem with because I can certainly blur those lines. And that comes from my past writing movie screenplays and stuff. And so I do like the structure, and I do kind of map out a loose structure. What's kind of the point of each act? And I will do an outline. Like I'll start writing. I'm usually pretty good at writing the first third of the book. And then once I have that, I'll be like, okay, where can this go from here? I'll do an outline. And then inevitably I'll veer off the outline. Like 2 entries in, just because you get in that zone and something new comes up, which is great. And then every once in a while I'll come back to the outline. Like that could still work. That could still work. Yeah, it's like I have a general direction where I want to go with it. But I don't know how it's going to end because I think how it ends, obviously, it's related to what happens before that. And don't drink while I'm talking to you.
It's just water.
I
almost spit it onto the microphone.
I've been avoiding taking a drink this whole time to be respectful of the show. And you just
respectful of the show. Have you seen this show?
There we go.
We're even now.
Yes. There we go. And quenched.
We have bonded over mutual disrespect. Isn't that what dudes do? I mean, that's just sort of
exactly.
how it goes.
Exactly.
I have no idea what the hell we're talking about.
So
plotting, outlining.
Yeah. Sometimes I use an outline, but I'm more than happy to ignore it.
Well, I can tell you one thing. There's certainly nothing wrong with choosing a tried and true thing, as I mentioned before, because there have been times when I've tried something new in the past and people hated it. And that's the thing. Like readers and just artistic consumers in general, they always say like, I want something new, something unique, something different, and then you give that to them like, nah, I hate it. So they
don't want anything new.
No, they like what. People are comfortable with what they know, and so there's certainly nothing wrong, and it doesn't water down the effort of the art itself at all. So aside from writing, you also worked on film as producer, director. Are you still doing any work in that field? So
my background with that is I went to film school and made a bunch of short movies. I directed a feature film in 2008 called Brain Jacked, which I think you can still get on Amazon. And the year after that, I produced the last feature film of Herschel Gordon Lewis, who, if you're a fan of horror movies, you should know who he is. He's the guy who put bloody gore into movies with a movie called Blood Feast in 1963, which is a rite of passage type movie. I ended up watching it when I was 13 and had a dream come true by getting to work with the maestro himself.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was amazing. So that was great, and I got a zillion stories from that, but that might take up another episode. And then so both of those were great experiences, very difficult, especially with young kids and a full-time job and all this stuff. And that kind of evolved naturally into a B-movie type distribution company that I ran for a while. So I really haven't made a movie in a long time. And then in 2015, I started shooting another movie, which clearly means it's not finished yet. But that's because I didn't want, with movies are very stressful. I don't know if you've ever made one or worked on. Yeah. Very, very stressful. And if I want stress and I want deadlines in a media production type of environment, I can get that with my day job.
Yeah.
So when I decided to make this next movie, I didn't want anything to do with it unless it could be like when I used to make movies as a kid, where there's no deadlines and we make it when we want to make it, and I don't want to do it if we're not having fun.
Right.
So that was the long story for your question. But basically, I'm actually doing a rough assembly edit on that now. There's still plenty of scenes that we have to shoot. But like I said, we started it in 2015 and it's 2019 and we're still working on it. So it'll come out eventually.
Awesome. I see a dog wandering back and forth every now and then. What's the name?
Birdie.
Birdie.
The dog is Birdie. Birdie, come here.
Birdie. Oh,
she's
there she is.
What's up?
Pretty well behaved. She listens better than my kids do. I'll tell you that.
What? I got nothing for you. No. Sorry.
All right. Well, that does it for me. We're right at about the half-hour mark, if you can believe that. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I really want to have you back sometime and talk more about and hear some of those movie stories, if you don't mind. I think that would be really interesting.
I'll be happy to do it. They're ridiculous.
Explore another part of the dark heart of Andrew Allan. I think you would enjoy that.
I can't dispute that.
No. All right. Thanks so much, Andrew. We appreciate you coming on.
All right. Take care, man.
Yep.